Hi everyone, my name is Allison, and for my cross-cultural presentation, I'm going to be doing Korean Cinderella. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to go over some of the background information regarding the culture and the context of the story, and then I'm going to go into the cultural traditions mentioned throughout the story, some of them, and then I'm going to go into some of the main differences and similarities, and finally I'm going to conclude with the main overarching theme. So starting with some of the background context, this story was written in the 90s. However, I believe this story is taking place during one of the Korean Empire time periods because a nobleman is mentioned during the festival or the big function that almost every Cinderella story has at the end of the story. So because the nobleman is mentioned, I assumed it was during the Korean Empire. And so this family lives in a traditional hanok, which is a Korean house. And in this house, there are specific wings and parts to the house, and the house has to face south so the sun hits it the best. And then some things that determine social status besides the size of the house is what's being used in parts of the house. So someone of a higher status would be using the left wing for art, and someone of a lower status would be using the left wing for livestock or storage. And then my final piece of background information regarding the Korean Cinderella is that clothing is very important to be used as like social status. So the step sibling is always given the nicer clothing, and then our Cinderella, or my Cinderella, is given the rags as clothing, and then instead of like ribbons in her hair, she gets ropes. But yeah, that was the final information, background information on some of the cultural context. So, some of the cultural traditions that I saw were being reinforced were, I found three big ones. The first one is pretty small and a little silly. I noticed that they said pickled cabbage for the festival, and I love kimchi, and kimchi is used as a side dish for almost every dish. It literally goes well with almost everything. Like, I just eat kimchi with rice, kimchi with eggs, kimchi with everything. But anyways, so another cultural tradition I saw being reinforced was like the respect to authority and the respect to elderly, in the way that Pear Blossom, which is my Cinderella, has to refer to her stepmother as mother throughout the entire story. So she's constantly referring to her as Omani, which is Korean and mother, instead of stepmother, which I thought was different from from the Disney Cinderella. So those were all of the cultural traditions that I saw throughout this story. So onto the main differences and similarities throughout this story. So in this Cinderella, Pear Blossom is given like background information on why she has to live in this abusive situation. And basically her mother died one winter, so her father married a widow, and that widow had a daughter named Peony, and then the father had a daughter named, Pear Blossom. So that's how the living situation came to be. So I was grateful for the explanation that we don't really see in the Disney Cinderella. So another main difference is that Pear Blossom only has one step sibling, which is Peony, and she is only tormented by one instead of two, which I think is a positive. But another thing that I found different was that she still lives with her dad, and she still sees her dad every day. So it's not like she completely lost her original family, like in the Disney Cinderella. And then in the Disney Cinderella, I don't remember them calling Cinderella any specific fixed nicknames, but in this Cinderella, the stepmother and Peony always call Pear Blossom Piglet or Pigling, and then they threaten to send her to the market all the time. So that's one thing. And then her first big task, unlike in the Disney Cinderella, she has to fill up a jar that has a hole at the bottom. And then in the Disney Cinderella, I think she has to mop up whatever her step-sibling spilled. And then in Disney Cinderella, it's a godmother magic being that's helping her with all of these tasks and helping her throughout the movie and helping her persevere through the abuse. However, in this story, it's magic animals that fit the context of the task that help her persevere throughout all the mistreatment. And her 3 tasks throughout this story, just so there's context to the animals I'm going to mention, are filling up a water jar, picking rice grains out of the dirt, and weeding a field. So that was a frog, sparrows, and an ox. So it's all magical animals that were helping her. And then, much like in Cinderella, she is allowed to go to the big function, but in this story it's a festival, not a party or a ball. But she's allowed to go once she finishes the impossible task that every Cinderella is given, and in this case her impossible task is to weed an entire field. But she gets the help of an ox, so she finally gets to go to the festival. And just like in the original, just like in the Cinderella, the Disney Cinderella story, she loses her shoe, and when she comes home the next day, the man brings it back to her. But instead of this man being Prince Charming, like in the Disney Cinderella, this man is a magistrate, so I'm assuming he's part of like the security at the festival. And the step-siblings and the mother make a fool out of themselves to try and get the magistrate to pay attention to them, but the magistrate is very dead set on making Pear Blossom his bride, just like how Prince Charming is very, very set on making Cinderella, or being interested in Cinderella, living happily ever after. So after I've gone over a little bit of background culture, I've gone over the cultural traditions I found, and some of the big differences and similarities of this story, I'm going to conclude with the main overarching theme. So Pear Blossom had known a beautiful life prior to the abuse, and then she was sucked into this awful, terrible new life, but with the help of magic beings, she's able to persevere the mistreatment and finally live the life she deserves. And much like in all the other Cinderella stories, they persevere and throughout the abuse with the magic being. So that is the overarching theme of my Cinderella story, and the one that I found similar to the Disney version of Cinderella. That is it for my cross-cultural presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys have a great summer. Thank you.